Coming up, the New York Football Giants play a close game, but ultimately make too many mistakes to beat the Minnesota Vikings over the holiday weekend. We break down some of the areas where they came up short, how the loss was softened by the rest of the NFL slate, and what it means with the Indianapolis Colts coming up next. Yes, friends. It's OGP, the One Giant Podcast, where we are your hosts over here, Adam Arbrecht, breaking down the 9 straight winning streak Brooklyn Nets over on the Locked On Nets podcast with my boy Doug Norrie. And yonder there's the healthy, wealthy, and wise, although marginally depleted, Andrew Makowitz. How are we, sir?
I mean, I usually love the Christmas holiday time of year, but Adam, when it's like 5 degrees outside and your furnace breaks on Friday and you're worried about getting heat, let me tell you, that is one of the more anxiety-riddled situations that you're going to be in. But have no fear, new furnace already installed. We're back going here, rocking strong.
Can't be stopped. Have no fear. OGP is here. Although, don't call us for your furnace problems.
No.
So you survived it. Everyone survived the holiday weekend. Hopefully, you had a good time with you and yours. Yeah, do that. And then, of course, I mean, Hanukkah, Kwanzaa, Christmas, whatever you're doing this holiday season, enjoy. Yes, Festivus for the rest of us. Enjoy it. And hopefully, it was maybe a marginally better experience than Andy had for a brief amount of time. But family was still involved, so that's what matters most. The New York Football Giants here played the Vikings to a 27-24 loss. And it's funny because this, I think, is the kind of game you go up against the high-powered offense. We talked about it in our prediction show. I called for 27-24. I just had the Giants winning the game, so that was right there for me. But this one, even though it ends up being almost 30-point game, it did have a little bit more of a Giants game kind of vibe than a Minnesota Vikings game, right? It's a little bit stagnated. It's a little bit sluggish. You're grinding things out. And all of a sudden, when you turned around at halftime at this one and it was 10, you talk about 10-7, hey, we could really be in this thing. And the Giants were getting the ball to start the second half. We'll talk about the mistakes, but I thought coming out of the break, they ended up punting away there to start. Now they get back involved. This becomes a back and forth game. But I just thought that every moment throughout this one was like, here's a big momentum opportunity. Oh, it's so close to maybe taking control of this game. Several times I thought the Giants are playing better in this game so far. But as we talked about, when you have the Justin Jeffersons of the world, Dalvin Cook, not a big game, but when you have a lot of weapons like that, it really does make it that you can be explosive and get yourself right back in the blink of an eye.
It did feel like a couple things. One, it felt like the Giants were in this game the whole entire time. Obviously, like it felt like these were two relatively even matched teams. I kind of sat there and said, all right, we're going toe to toe with a team that's probably going to finish as the number 2 seed in the NFC. So that piece of it was encouraging for me. The Giants outpassed and outrushed the Minnesota Vikings, who have a top 10 offense in the league. That was encouraging to me.
Yeah.
What I think it shows how thin the margins are when you are the Giants, though, is that the Minnesota Vikings did not turn the ball over, even though maybe some reviews didn't go the Giants' way. But the Giants aren't built to overcome multiple catastrophic turnovers or issues, fumbling the ball. You look at the Bellinger play, that was a critical one. We'll probably go through all, some of the big key moments.
Yeah.
The Daniel Jones interception, another big one. Also, Adam, the Giants were penalized on so many plays. They played a little bit of undisciplined football, 7 penalties as opposed to 2 for the Minnesota Vikings. When you put all this together, it's just like the Giants are in it, but think about how much you have to overcome in order to win the game.
Well, remember, and we talked about that coming into it as well, right? When we think about the penalties and kind of how this team hasn't necessarily been the most disciplined over the last several games. They're in top 5 most penalized teams in the league, right? So that's going to hurt you there. Obviously, you mentioned one of the ones. We'll go through this laundry list of issues that they had in this game. I want to note, too, that remember this was a 10-0 game after the field goal in the second quarter from the Minnesota Vikings. The Giants came back with Isaiah Hodgins' touchdown in the second quarter. It's 7-10 going to the break. And then they came out in the third quarter, 2 field goals, right? Like that to me was a big moment here. Non-mistake related was just you go out, 8 plays, 49 yards, 3:42 off the clock, 3 points. 8 plays, 55 yards, 4:42 off the clock, 3 points. And we talked about this again. You end up in the 20s, so you gloss over this to a certain extent. But that's just the reality because why? Turn right back around. It's a Hawkinson touchdown to start the fourth quarter there for the Vikings. Now you're down 17-13. Again, you come back with a very short drive to get another field goal there, but it just 3 field goals in a row there. It's just too much to overcome and say that, yeah, now you're going to turn around. And we know, as we'll talk about these mistakes here, how it set it up to then be trailing by 8 points. You still come back from that really big moment inside of that game from Saquon Barkley in that drive. And then Daniel Jones with a great 2-point conversion, finding Bellinger. You mentioned that key fumble from him. It's one of those things where you feel like you're down 8 there. You're like, yeah, but maybe you should still be up, or you should be tied at that point, right? It should have been the Vikings trying to come back to even things up with you, not them incrementally moving ahead. So that's just really felt like the theme of this game. But when we look inside, you mentioned the Daniel Bellinger fumble. That one really hurts. The Daniel Jones interception. Again, it's a good game for Daniel Jones. It's a really solid game for Daniel Jones. It's a really bad throw. It's an interception. It's behind him. Like, we got to be able to do that and then still say it was a good game and he's a good quarterback and it's all good. The punt block, that was the big one to me, right? Scottish Hammer gets blocked. I can't determine if it's the protection or if it's him and the way that he punts, because he boomed one and flipped the field for a 60-plus yard punt at one point in this game. But there's been multiple times that he's had punts blocked this year, and I don't know what it is in those instances, but that created a really, really short field for Minnesota, and that's what extended out that lead for them at that point too.
Yeah, I mean, that was backbreaking, soul-crushing. Any way you wanna describe how much that hurts, knowing that it's a one-point game, the defense is playing hard, you're gonna punt the ball away, and maybe if you get a stop, a field goal wins the game for the Giants.
And that's
Instead,
that Justin Jefferson touchdown, right?
yeah, I think he scored like a touchdown just shortly right
Yeah,
after.
17-yard pass, 5-play, 29 yards, a minute of game time because you get that block punt where maybe, just maybe, you thought Julian Love was going to pick that thing up and scamper to try to pick that up.
Yeah, he picks it up and you're thinking, just how far do you have to go? How far are the sticks from this one? But Adam, the outside of Graham Gano, our special teams has been an Achilles heel for the Giants.
Yep.
We talk about Richie James, who had multiple fumbles in the return game. You talk about our kick return, our kick defense has been terrible. It feels like everyone's getting it out to the 35 to 40. And then you talk about the punter. We can't be having multiple blocked punts in a season. Like, someone's got to figure something out. I will say I've been critical of Gillen. I just don't see this one being on him. The guy came up the middle unblocked, and it's like there's not much you could do. But overall, it just shows there's something wrong with our special teams. And McGahee, who's been here for a little bit in terms of our special teams coordination, has to get this right. You can't be a team that is trying to manufacture points, can't get above 30, and making critical mistakes in special teams. Those are the times where you have to be executing flawlessly to give yourself a chance to win. Yeah, that punt block, even though the Giants came down, showed some resilience on offense, marched down the field in under a minute, 75-yard touchdown drive. It just felt like the Giants were constantly trying to overcome an issue of a turnover or an interception or a punt block, and ultimately it caught them with another franchise record kick as time is expiring against the Giants. Does it feel like this happens to us more than every other team in the league?
Oh yeah, I mean, yeah, just the energy as it was leading to that just felt like, again, especially in today's NFL, you're like 60, 61, 62, 64. Like, there's not really a distance anymore where you go, it's too far, you'll never get there, right? Unless you're in the really windy conditions that Gano faced a handful of weeks ago, right? Against the Commanders in that tie. Like, it's just like, yeah, like it's going to be. So you're inside, perfect conditions. Yeah, of course the Giants are going to lose on that. And you mentioned too, that drive, it's funny. And this is kind of like the little things that you think back to, because you tie that game on that long drive, a 7-play drive that involved, I wanted to make sure I had it right. Richie James picks up a pass there. You get an incomplete to James then with that drop. Jones gets to Slayton. You get it. It's kind of an up and down, really, because that's what I was feeling about. It was like a little bit up and down here because a couple more incomplete passes. Jones scrambles, though, picks up some yardage, and then you get that 27-yard rush from Saquon Barkley for the touchdown, and then the 2-point conversion. But it was just one of those things where you go on that 4th and 2, you get that and you go, well, there's still 2 minutes left. Like, and I know you're only tying the game. So at best you're thinking, let's tie this thing up. Let's convert the 2-point conversion. Let's go to overtime and give ourselves a punt search chance. If we get the ball first, we can go win this game. When he breaks through for that touchdown, you're like, hell yeah. Daniel Bellinger gets 2 points. All right. And then you look up and you go,
Well,
I don't,
so
I don't feel
family
so
members, family members in my house said the exact same thing. And I was actually thinking about it on the other side of it, Adam, which is the Giants.
Fine, they can go score. Maybe we can go score again.
The Giants have multiple timeouts, right? And there's when they scored, there was over 2 minutes left in the game. Yeah. So you're thinking the Giants get 3 opportunities to get a stop. And Adam, it was so close to working in the Giants' favor. Like everyone seems to remember the 61-yard field goal, but what you forget is the play right before that is this soul-crushing back-breaking play, is Kirk Cousins to Justin Jefferson for 17 yards. They were on their side of the field, 3rd and 11, and if he doesn't get that, the Giants may get the ball back with timeouts with like 30 seconds on the clock.
I'll go one further, Andy. Think back to when they're on their own 26 on a 3rd and 9 with 1:14 to go. Kirk Cousins hits Jefferson for the first down there, 16 yards. So you mentioned that 17-yard play too. Those 2 plays inside of a drive with 2 minutes to go. And it's not to harp on the defense. I thought, they did everything that they could. I'll be honest. I don't think they got as much pressure as we were hoping for on Kirk Cousins, right? Like I thought... I really thought that this was going to be like a running for your life for Kirk Cousins and then heaving up some prayers that Jefferson went and got. And by the way, he had several big plays inside of this game, as we know, but it didn't quite have that energy to it. So I'm not going to put it on the defense. It's a tough matchup all around. But man, with 2 minutes to go in a tie game when you just need the stop, to give up back-breaking 3rd and long conversions 2 times on that drive. And then, as you say, it's just the field goal, virtually a chip shot, really, when you think about it, because that thing could have made it from 65 or 66 yards.
Yeah, some other key highlights that I'm just thinking about in my mind is it is funny that Daniel Jones's 2 highest passing yard games are both in losses to the Lions and both the Vikings. But I think obviously the Lions game, I don't think Daniel Jones played as well in that game as they did in this one. It felt like he completed 70% of his passes, had 300 something yards. It felt like he had pretty good command against a very bad pass defense. Like, let's be clear about how bad they are. But I mean, when you think about the key highlights of this game on where it went wrong, it's all the miscues and errors. It's not, Saquon Barkley didn't play well. Jones didn't play well. Richie James had another debilitating drop that felt like it was critical, where it hits him in the numbers. All of these little mistakes, Adam, it just felt like in order for the Giants to come out with a victory here, they're going to have to get lucky, and they're going to have to get one of these mishaps by the Vikings. It never happened. They picked up those critical 3rd and 9s and 3rd and 11s and then make the 61-yarder. We needed kind of that sack fumble or that interception for Kirk Cousins to really flip the game script, because at the end, to your point, the Giants are down 8. Best case scenario is you go down, score, tie it up, and you give Kirk Cousins the ball back with 2 minutes to go.
And let's be honest, man, 3 touchdowns, no interceptions, 300 yards for Kirk Cousins on 48 passes, right? 64 yards for Dalvin Cook. This is where, again, and we've talked about this before, and I want to highlight a wide receiver here in a minute, including Richie James, who, by the way, he had 90 yards on 8 catches. Again, it really is because it's when the mistake gets made, when the drop pass occurs, right? And it's like, and I'll chastise Daniel Bellinger for fumbling it. I'm not going to beat him up and tell you it's the end of his career, but I am going to say, man, you really just secure that damn ball, because in a game like this, you can't afford to lose that battle. But, the Dalvin Cook 14 rushes for 64 yards. I always come back. We've said this several times throughout the season. Teams often come in, and in this instance, the secondary it's much more depleted for the Giants than it has been in previous weeks. But at the same time, it's like, man, when you look at the stats and where the Giants struggle defensively, it's, the running game does not hold up defensively. Yet teams are like, but you know what I think though? I think it's the passing. And in a lot of ways, like that kept affording the Giants to be in this one. Now, if you're the Vikings, you look at it as, yeah, but when we go to that well and we go to that well and we go to that well, it's the home run hits that we're looking for here. But, 14 carries for Dalvin Cook is almost, I mean, it's borderline. I'll put it this
Malpractice.
way. If they had lost that game, as good as the passing attack looked, they would be looking at Dalvin Cook not getting enough touches in the running game, not being involved enough offensively, as he only had 3 catches for 13 yards in the pass game. They would have been circling, underlining, and highlighting that as being like, this is why we lost this game. And you never, I think, want to have that win or lose. So that was a big takeaway for me. But go ahead, because I want to talk about Barkley and Hodgins here.
Okay, so I'll take the Hodgins piece, and it may be a larger conversation,
but
but
juicy one.
Isaiah Hodgins has been a revelation for the Giants. Now, when we think about what they're asking him to do and where we think he may fit in long term, they're asking him to do way more than I think anyone feels comfortable with, but he's continuing to produce for this team. He puts himself in the right position. He finds a way to just be open. He uses his body very well to make sure it's a big target for Daniel Jones. I have been very impressed with Isaiah Hodgins, as I'm sure most Giant fans are. But here's where I'm going to put a little bit of a wrinkle. The Giants' 2 receivers that had the most targets on the day were Richie James with 12 and Isaiah Hodgins with 11.
Mm-hmm.
When you look at the Minnesota Vikings and you look at the difference between these two teams, the top 2 in targets were Justin Jefferson with 16 and TJ Hawkinson with 16. You're talking about arguably the best wide receiver in the entire NFL. And you're talking about a Pro Bowler, current Pro Bowler in TJ Hawkinson. You just look at the disparity between who we're throwing to and who's getting the targets and like their abilities on the field. And it is miraculous that we're finding a way, and Mike Kafka is scheming a way to just try to manufacture some offense, knowing the limitations that we have.
Okay. I mean, I'll give you. I mean, I thought it was a really great game for Hodgins. I like how he projects forward for the Giants. I think you can like him being a part of this wide receiver room, whether you want to slot him in as, I think if you think about drafting a wide receiver and then having Robinson back healthy, him as your third guy, right, can be really exciting for this offense. So I think you can be happy about that. I'll push back on it a little bit because Saquon Barkley had 8 catches on 10 targets in this game for 49 yards. Like, I get what you're saying. Listen, we all understand the Giants' offensive weapons, specifically inside the wide receiver room, don't look as shiny as other teams. And the Vikings arguably have maybe the best collection of total talent on the offensive side of the ball. But also, like, it's like, I think this is the thing where I'm like, hey, man, like we don't get to have it both ways, right? We can't talk about how this looks really good, but that's not good. Like, I don't like making the built-in excuses. You were in a football game that you could have won, and if you didn't fumble it, and that's Daniel Bellinger, who we like as a rookie, and if Daniel Jones doesn't throw an interception, and we like him and he's playing well, but that has nothing to do with the talent. Like even with the drops from Richie James, even with everything that went on, if you don't do those 2 things, if those 2 things don't happen, you're winning this game potentially. So it's like, again, I just, like it's the NFL. Any given Sunday, the team is talented enough to have 8 wins on the season. It means you're talented enough to win a game like this. So it's not me. I get it. Like talent wise, we understand the difference, but I just like go win the football game, especially when you see that you can go win the football game.
It's not it. So I think you may be misinterpreting why I was saying that. I'm saying it's a positive for Brian Dable and Mike Kafka, et cetera, to look across the field and say, Dalvin Cook, Justin Jefferson, Jay Hawkinson, they have that talent. We expect them to be able to put up 27, 28 points a game. And Kirk Cousins has been playing amazing football, saying, let's just get it to these playmakers and figure it out. The Giants have done a really good job figuring out how to manufacture yards down the field, manufacture drives, knowing that you can't just say, go get it, Richie James, like you can with Justin Jefferson. So it's more credit to the Giants coaching staff for figuring out how to even keep this team in the game. And to your point, they had an opportunity to win this game, but you just can't commit those critical errors and mistakes that we talked about, which ultimately was the demise for the team.
Here's an interesting one, just to kind of put a bow on this. First of all, I think maybe you were referencing earlier the Cordell Flott interception that ends up getting brought back because he didn't have control of it. You did just real very quickly. Were you saying that like that didn't go the Giants' way? I mean, he clearly didn't have control of the football.
Well, so for me personally, they say that the ground can't help you catch the ball. I'm fully appreciative of that. My answer is that he had the ball. The ground didn't help him in any way. I thought that was a very difficult call for the Giants, just knowing that it was challenged. You have to have like overwhelming evidence. Yes, the ball was on the ground. I mean, I'm a homer. I'm kind of like, did
No, it's okay.
did it
By the
help
way,
him, or did it?
the easy answer is the ball clearly is touching the ground. It clearly helps him from losing the ball. So it was called an interception on the field, and you wanted it to be a tight call that stayed for the Giants. I can appreciate that.
Right. I mean, come on,
Yeah, I
listen.
get it.
But
But that's what
if
not. But that's not a. It's not a. They got hosed on
no,
that
no, no, no,
call.
no,
Yeah,
no. I'm saying those are the types of things where it's like not only the call on the field, but if Cordell Flock can just hold on to the
just hold
ball a
on to the
little
ball.
bit
Yes,
more,
exactly.
then the
Yeah,
Giants get the critical turnover that we were
yeah.
talking about. Yeah, listen. Am I mad at them for making the decision they did? No, the ball hits the ground. My
Yeah.
argument is like, well, you called it an interception. Can I squint my
Yeah.
eyes enough to be able to say maybe he kind of still had it? But yes, I meant that was a huge turning point where like
Yeah.
if he just finds a way to tuck it, Giants get an extra possession out of it, and maybe the Vikings take 3 or 7 off the board.
Right. Fumble for Bellinger, interception for Daniel Jones, not an interception for Cordell Flott. All of a sudden, and you throw in the
The block punt.
blocked punt, and suddenly, like those are 4 moments. By the way, those 4 moments, and maybe we'll tie it back into what you said about like the way this team, the coaching staff is manufacturing success. You put those 4 plays into most recipes for a book against a high-powered offense in a game. You're talking about probably losing by 2 scores going away, as opposed to being into it down to the final kick.
Flip one of those big critical plays in the Giants' favor, and there's a good chance that they win this game. That's how close it was for the Giants to be able to be there, right? Like,
And honestly, I think the punt might be the biggest one, like
I
all
know.
things being equal, because it was such a short field, like it guaranteed points, and then the back gets broken with the touchdown. Who knows how that goes? But you saw when he bombed one out and flipped the field for you. If you just have them starting from their own 25 or 30, it's so drastically different than being already basically in the red zone. Good.
But it's not doom and gloom, my friend. It is
No,
not
okay.
doom and
Yes, it's
gloom.
not doom and gloom, because we are going to talk about what happened over the weekend as well, and why it kind of softened the blow. It softened the blow in a very big way for these New York Football Giants. The one last thing I want to note here is just that the Giants put up 24 points against the Vikings, and just relatively speaking, the Colts scored 39 on them. Oh, sorry, 36 on them. The Lions scored 34 on them. When they're giving up in the 20s, it's against teams like the Jets, 22, 26 to the New England Patriots. They beat Buffalo, but giving up 30. There's a lot of these instances. It's like interesting to think back just to what Minnesota's given up and what the Giants achieved in that. I think they're in a pretty positive group of teams in terms of getting points against the Vikings. They don't look like some of the less competitive offensive units around the league, but they still come up short. I do have a thought on Saquon Barkley, but we'll hold on that for right now, because what we want to make sure we get to here is when you go back and then look at this weekend and you say, boy, if the Giants win this game, I was talking, listen, there's always a chance. There's always a chance if Dallas were to lose, which they didn't. They also beat the Philadelphia Eagles. Doesn't really matter for us. But over the course of this weekend, several key things went the New York Football Giants' way. Carolina absolutely blows apart the Detroit Lions 37-28. So one team we're concerned about, they fall by the wayside. The Seattle Seahawks, they also fall by the wayside over the course of this weekend, which puts the Giants in another strong spot, 24-10 against the Kansas City Chiefs. Then you look at Washington, which we kind of were assuming, but you always like to get the confirmation, 37-20, losing on the road to the San Francisco 49ers. Really, everything that you could have asked for, those three being the biggest and most important, because they're right there in that category. It essentially said, Andy, pause for the weekend, right? Like nothing changed for the Giants. They still hold their fate. Nobody gained any ground on them. And the only team that made some headway in that wild card picture would be the Green Bay Packers. And guess what? We want to put them in the group because they are still in it. 4 teams. Hey, guess what? We'll take that you end up having the lowest win total team get a victory over the weekend.
Yeah, while the game was frustrating to see the Giants lose to the Vikings, you couldn't have really asked for more if you were wondering where the Giants sit in the larger scale playoff picture. Having Washington, Seattle, and the Lions all lose and all look relatively bad. Like I know that there's no moral
The only one
victories.
I can tell you, the only one that I think like they did look relatively bad. The only one that really looks bad is Detroit and Carolina, right? Because Detroit's been on this run. They've been playing really well. Carolina's been playing well too, to be fair. But San Francisco, Kansas City, hey, like, you just got to kind of strap in and hope for the best there. But that other game was pretty brutal if you're the Detroit Lions.
Oh, I mean, yes, Detroit. If you're Detroit, you cannot lose a game to Carolina in that way. Listen, we talk about the Giants beating Carolina. You're like, yeah, well, they're not really that good of a team. It's like, hey, Detroit, go out and win these games if you're supposed to be a potential playoff team. Seattle obviously only scored 10 points. They rely on their offense to really keep them in games, and it was not there against Kansas City.
Mm-hmm.
It's not that they lost to Kansas City. It's the way that they only put up 10 points. It felt very meager. It feels like they are limping into the end of the season. And Adam, Washington, while they put up 20 points against San Francisco, there's a question of who's even going to be their starting quarterback moving forward for the
Yeah.
next handful of games. They're saying it's 50-50 coin flip between Carson Wentz and Taylor Heineke, because while Carson Wentz takes one more sack per game, Taylor Heineke actually turns the ball over at a higher rate. And they're like, what do we actually need? Who has the higher upside? I'm saying of all the ways that this could have developed for the Giants,
Oh, yeah.
question marks all over the place for the other teams. The Giants at least look like they were in this game, in this fight against the Vikings the whole way through.
Yeah, and yes, 100%. Right. Everyone could have lost, and you've been like, hey, nothing changed. It's all fine. And everybody looked terrible. No, the Giants played a good football game and could have come out on the winning side. You look inside the playoff picture, then we know the Giants are 8-6-1. The Commanders are 7-7-1. That's the 6th and the 7th seed in the wild card. As it stands right now, you have Seattle, Detroit, and the Packers all at 7-8. Carolina 6-9. I only make mention of them because technically they could still get back into that divisional conversation, because they do play the Bucs head to head, and they already beat them early in the year. So if they finish with identical records, Carolina will go in over top of the Buccaneers. It just seems worth noting because it's the GOAT and he may not make the playoffs. But for the Giants, again, you'd have to lose out and go 8-1 to put a position in place where, forget about the Commanders, because let's just, they can make it or not make it. When you think about the Seattle Lions, Detroit, and the Packers, who we have the tiebreaker against, obviously, that would be the most interesting scenario, because they would have to win out, get to 9-8, and we would have to lose out. So that's the way that we come up short in the playoff picture. And you then would need to have either both those teams do that, or the Commanders get themselves up over top of us as well and move 2 teams ahead of us and bump us out of that playoff picture. But go ahead.
I was going to say, so I don't know if it's good news or bad news, but in week 18, those Detroit Lions play the Green Bay Packers. One of them will have to lose. One of them will essentially have to win that game, which will be essentially an elimination game for one of those teams.
Yeah.
That means that this week is even more critical because of who can potentially lose to allow the Giants to get a playoff berth. And it's the same cast of characters that we've talked about before. There's a whole host of scenarios. If the Giants win this game against the Indianapolis Colts, which we'll get into that in a second, Adam,
yeah,
they're in no matter what. Now, if they don't win this game, we just need to have some kind of combination of Washington, Seattle, Detroit, and Green Bay lose their games this upcoming week. The more of them lose, the better chance there is for the Giants to make the playoffs. There's different combinations of like Washington and Seattle or Detroit and Green Bay, but essentially we need those 4 teams to lose games.
Yeah, that's all it comes down to. And again, the Commanders, they're 7-7-1. If we were to lose, okay, let's get into it here just very briefly. We're going to talk about Saquon Barkley tomorrow. There's some things that I want to bring up about this past game for him, more heavily involved in the passing attack. But what do we expect from him down the stretch here and going into a potential playoff game? The Giants are playing the Colts. Breaking news, the Colts suck. And if you are the New York Football Giants coming off of a game where you lost by 3 points on a last-second field goal to, as you said, the 2 seed potentially, most likely, Minnesota Vikings. If you go in and you lose at your home stadium with essentially the playoffs on the line to a team that has lost 5 straight games, that has lost 8 out of their last 9, and again, they played the Eagles really close 17-16 a handful of weeks ago. But over the last 3 games specifically, at Dallas 54-19, at Minnesota 39-36. They show they're capable of putting up points, but that was before they made the switch to Nick Foles. They lost to the Chargers, who needed the win to solidify their playoff placement, 20-3. if you're worth anything, and I don't know how it's going to make me feel in the back end, you go win the game. Whatever happens, you miss the playoffs in some insane scenario, fine, but it cannot be on the back of losing to the Indianapolis Colts at home. This is like everything that you said that you've been building towards. It's all the reasons why Adoree Jackson hasn't seen the field as soon as we maybe thought he could have. And by the way, you can say it makes total sense in the world until you watch a game where you lose by 3 points on a last-second field goal and you start to wonder, could maybe Adoree Jackson have been a bit of a pivotal piece inside of that matchup. Go win this game. Because if you don't, I'll still take making the playoffs in whatever scenario that looks like, but it's not going to feel good, man. The Colts are literally a tanking team with a celebrity coach at the helm right now. It'll be a pretty big gut punch if you lose to this team. And it'll be a pretty big gut punch if you only beat them 17-14.
At the end of the day, Adam.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, at the end of the day, my friend, I by hook or by crook, by any means necessary, beat the Indianapolis Colts. I don't care if it's on a last-minute field goal by Graham Gano. I don't care about any of that because I want to make the playoffs. I want this team to be in a position. Who would have thought that if the Giants win this game, they're in a position in the last week of the season to say, who needs to get healthy? Who needs to get right? Where do we want to be in the grand scheme of this playoff picture? But to your point, there's no Jonathan Taylor. He's out for the season. They've tried Matt Ryan. He's deactivated for the rest of the year. They tried Sam Ehlinger. It didn't work out. They're now on what the remnants of whatever Nick Foles is at this point in his career. The Giants have to win this game. If you are a team to be taken seriously at all, you need to beat a team like the Indianapolis Colts that has a bunch of injuries and is not playing for anything at this point. So I am with you. There's a whole host of scenarios where we want all these other teams to lose. But to your point, that seems irrelevant. Like, you have to just go out and handle your own business. And if you can't, oh man, then week 18 becomes a whole nother can of worms for the Giants.
Cleveland travels to Washington in week 17. Minnesota travels to Green Bay. The Jets travel to Seattle, and you're going to have Chicago traveling to Detroit. So, in the spectrum of it, you wouldn't have thought the Packers could beat the Vikings a handful of weeks ago, but they're rolling a little bit. So, most of these games, I think, really are toss-ups across the board for a number of different reasons. It'll be interesting to see how all of them play out. Obviously, we'll be glued to it. And the nice thing, at least for me, is that, they do play simultaneously. Chicago and Detroit, as well as Cleveland and Washington, will be playing while the Giants are playing the Colts. And then we may have a sweat around Seattle and Green Bay in those later windows, depending on how it goes. We have a long way to go, though. It's only Tuesday. So we have the entire week ahead of us to break it down, to look forward, see some of those key matchups. We'll do all of that. You get us on YouTube, you get us on the podcast feed, and you remember, as Andy Makowitz would want, need, and nay, demand the people know.
As always, let's go Big Blue.